Hi everybody, I'm Claire Braund and I'm here to welcome you to the Women on Board's 20 Years podcast. Today we've got a really super special guest. We have with us Ruth Medd, who was the woman who had the original idea of Women on Boards back in 2000 after the Sydney Olympic Games and around the time that she started to go into non-executive roles herself. Ruth and I met in 2003 and we went on to co-found WOB together in April 2006, forming a unique partnership until she retired from WOB in 2023. And it was through her early efforts and persistence that Women on Boards came into being. Well, hello, Ruth. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Claire. Lovely to be here, finally.
So before WOB, believe it or not, there was another Ruth Medd. So can you tell us a bit about your career and you before WOB?
Okay, well, I'll sort of go backwards. When we met for WOB, I'd already started my non-executive director career, and I was on 2 or 3 boards, the National Foundation for Australian Women, the Infants Home at Ashfield, and Australian Ethical Superannuation, which was a paid role, although not very much in those days. But prior to that, prior to taking up a non-executive role, my last sort of executive role was the CEO of the Australian Association of National Advertisers. And the reason I applied for that role was because I wanted to be the CEO of something, because I thought having a CEO on your CV looked reasonable, sort of thing. Now, the reality was the roles I'd done before that were probably a bit more substantial. One of my less successful roles was the Corporate Secretary of State Rail. They're sort of accidental, really, like many things, and less successful because the organisation was so foreign to what I had experienced up till then. It was beyond odd, shall we say. However, prior to that, I was at what became Telstra, and I helped the then chairman amalgamate OTC and Telecom a long time ago. And before that, I was the General Manager of the Australian Broadcasting Tribunal in the days, once again, a long time ago, when the media moguls were Alan Bond and Christopher Skase, if anybody remembers them. And prior to that, I did IT roles and policy roles, which I won't bore you all with. So there we go. Very eclectic.
An eclectic and adventurous career and happenstance, I think that one as well. We've had lots of fun talks about you and State Rail, but we won't air those on the podcast.
Oh, thank you. I am a train lover, though.
I know you're a train lover. You and Tim Fisher both. You and Catherine Ordway joined forces to start Women on Boards movement shortly after the Sydney Games. Your first event was at Westpac in 2001, supported by Westpac Chair Helen Lynch, and let's not forget Helen Lynch, one of the really pioneering women in this space, and was aimed at getting women on sports boards. Why was sport your focus at this time?
Well, it was Catherine's focus because she was a sports lawyer, essentially. And in fact, she's gone on to be a very successful one and a very influential one. And I should just acknowledge her and say she got the Afghan women's cricket team rescued into Australia. However, Catherine was sport and I was more general. And when we sat down and said, can we put on this event, it was a case of who do we know and who can we invite to it. So we not only invited the members of Women in Sport, which Catherine did, but my colleague Julie Ankers helped out. And so we invited women in marketing, women in management, women in super, women in finance, women in anything we could think of. And it's interesting that all these women in organisations spring up from time to time, and a lot of them just stick to their remit, whereas Women on Board was hoping to be a bit more inclusive, general, or whatever you'd like to call it. So that's how we got started. Thanks to Helen Lynch.
Yes, thanks to Helen Lynch. And as I said, I also want to acknowledge all of the women in organisations and, of course, Julie, who was in Zonta and I think still is at that stage as well. So they were a really great forerunner for us too. So following the success of this first event, through the NFAW, you obtained a grant from the Office of the Status of Women to do a detailed research project. And this is how we actually met. And I was reading this Delta Outlooks report, which was published in 2000. 2004. And it had a foreword by you that read in part, WOB Goes National aims to get women onto paid boards. So the research is integral to that effort and covers publicly listed companies and a range of associations and rural boards. So why was it so important to get women onto paid boards?
By then, I think I'd figured out that you'd get taken more seriously if you're on a paid board. I mean, sad though it may be, that at that time, and perhaps now, was the case. Also, if you're looking for a board career, which I sort of was at the time, if you don't get paid for anything, you're going to be on the dole queue. So there's a bit of sort of self-interest there. And also the other presumption at that time was that if you're on unpaid roles, they'll mysteriously make you more suitable for paid roles. And it's just not true. There are women who we've all come across in our time that are experienced directors, and they've got an absolute sheet of unpaid roles that they're on, and they've never managed to crack a paid role. And so the premise at the beginning was you've got to feed yourself, ladies. You've got to aim for some paid gigs.
Yeah, and that was a really big thing with us as well, because there was this idea that women somehow were more suited to one than the other, which was, of course, entirely erroneous, as we know. We used the report publication to launch Women on Boards project across Australia in 2004 and 2005 at a series of actually very large, very well-attended events with many directors from a wide range of companies and some former politicians who'd become directors who mentored aspirant women over dinner. Needless to say, many of the mentors were men because we'd pretty much maxed out all the available women in those senior roles at the time. I'm not sure anyone expected that much more would come from this sort of flurry of activity, and we would settle comfortably back to the status quo. But as Ken Allen, senior advisor to UBS, said in 2006 at one of our official events, WOB was an idea whose time had come. Now, you'd clearly thought this for a while, but why do you think the years between 2006 and when we formally launched here in Australia, and 2000, of course, when we launched in the UK, that everyone was so open to the idea of women on boards?
Right, a few things with that. Clearly in 2000, there was a bit of a sort of movement here, at least between Catherine and I. But prior to that, an organisation in the US called Catalyst had been, in fact, collecting data and publishing it for 2 or 3 years by then. And they latched onto this idea a bit before we did in Australia. But in Australia, between 2000 and 2003, 4 or whatever, there was a lot of talk about, there's not enough women on board. So the conversation was going on, but nobody was actually doing anything about it. And it's not that old story. You can sit and complain in the coffee shop here at, lovely Potts Point, but unless you get off your bottom and do something, you'll still be there complaining in the coffee shop, in times to come. And also by 2006, the idea was pretty accepted that perhaps the time had come for more women on boards.
Yeah. And also we had that in environment where quota law in Norway was raising its head as well. Of course, I got my Churchill, I went over there, and all of a sudden everyone here was desperate not to have quotas. So that, I think, prompted a bit of action.
Yeah, I think that's right, Claire, and I'd forgotten about that, but you're the Norway connection, yes?
We had a few Norway connections. We were known as real activists in those early years, lobbying and commenting on many issues. We had lots of opportunities and situations where women were being denied entry to the boardroom club. You were known as well for advocating that women take a small shareholding in listed companies and turn up at the AGM to pointedly ask why more, or any women in fact, were not on the board. Now, you did this yourself on numerous occasions, including to the Cochlear AGM a couple of times. So could you tell us about that and what the responses were usually like to your questions?
Right. I've got a couple of examples. One's more amusing than Cochlear, but Cochlear was a very nice Scandinavian gentleman who was the chair at the time, if I remember rightly. And I turned up, and I usually have 2 questions. One is, tell me something about page 53 of the accounts, just to sort of establish my credibility. And the second is, why haven't you got any women on the board? And I think the gentleman at the time said, "Oh, it's an interesting idea, but of course we don't have any vacancies." Right. That's a pretty good response. Interestingly enough, though, Cochlear subsequently did put some women onto their board. And it's my premise that turning up to an AGM and asking a question, many people think AGMs are a waste of time. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. When a shareholder stands up and asks either a sensible or a novel question, the company secretary is busily writing the minutes. And, it then gets put to the board. We had the AGM. What was the outcome? And the idea gets, socialized a little bit. My second story is even more amusing. I was actually quite a modest shareholder in a thing that had got something to do with toll roads that had been spun out of some of Macquarie Bank's adventures. And Mark Johnston was the chairman. And I stood up at that meeting. I didn't have to buy any extra shares to get to that one because I had some already. And I asked him, why weren't there any women on the boards? And what he said was, we've never thought of it. It's true. I mean, absolutely true. And afterwards, I was standing there, as you do at AGMs, because it's a great way to meet directors.
A cup of tea and a shortbread biscuit.
Yes, it's a great way to meet directors if you want to get onto boards. And so he came up to me and said, I've got a better answer for you now.
You were, as I said, a huge reader of the AFR. For those listeners who don't know, all the years that I knew Ruth and all the years that we travelled together, Ruth would be out the door early every single morning to the nearest coffee shop she could find with a cup of coffee and the AFR. I believe you've now gone digital, though.
I have. I'm online now, so I read it when I wake up early in the morning. And it's quite amusing some days.
So when we set up WOB, we were determined to remove the barriers to entry that so many women faced in their careers, such as lack of access to support, sponsors, and real opportunities for major leadership and board roles. Our Vacancy Board, which you managed and innovated for all of the 17 years that you were with WOB, was built on the premise that board roles should be accessible and visible to those who are seeking them, rather than people cherry-picking others to fill vacancies. Can you just comment on how important the really transparent WOB Vacancy Board has been over the years and why it remains just as important now as it was when we launched in 2006?
Yeah. If you don't know what's going on, you will never be part of what's going on, is basically the real answer. But the more sort of strategic answer is that WOB was built on the premise of advocacy, raising the bar on the issue. Until you do that, you'll never make too much progress. We then had to support, educate, mentor a range of women who had aspirations but didn't quite know what to do next vis-a-vis a board career. And there's no point doing that unless you can offer them something, you see, and that's what the Jobs Board was about. You've got to offer them some gigs. And I met some fairly amazing sort of people, and we got lots of support for the WOB Jobs Board from headhunters, governments, et cetera, et cetera. And it's terrific today. I look at it each week, and it's a great starting point for a board career, because it also, apart from giving you a list of things that are available, if you read it closely, occasionally, you'll see what sorts of things people are looking for. And you can think about, does that match me? How do I match that? And it helps to educate you when you apply for your next role.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ruth. And one thing that you always also told me is that there was a great variability in the quality of listings, shall we say. And so sometimes when things appear less sophisticated, rather than change them, we would leave them as being less sophisticated, because you always said to me that actually gives the member of WOB a real indication of where that organisation is at in terms of its governance and its own sophistication.
Yeah, that's right. And when you apply for a board role, it's important to know who you're meeting up with. A naivety vis-a-vis board recruitment, or somebody who really actually knows what they're looking for. And it's always wise to realise that sometimes you have to walk away, because, it's like the old story of Tracy He, who was one of the very early board members for WOB back in about 2000 or whatever it was, and beyond that, sorry. And she wanted to do something worthy, and she joined a not-for-profit, and she turned up to her first board meeting, and somebody said, we haven't really got a very up-to-date list of, say, members or whatever. And she said, okay, well, let's just do a spreadsheet, and I'll do that for you and send it on so you can put it onto your computer. The answer was, we don't have any computers. So you just have to be careful who you're getting into bed with, is the short answer.
Yeah, that is so true. WOB has undoubtedly had impact over the years, in particular through our advocacy and our actions. We were the first to publish the Boardroom Diversity Index that named individual companies, their chairs and how many women were on their boards. And of course, we started that in 2010. That went for a solid 10 years and was used as a measure by many people of how many people were on boards, not just in the ASX, but across all sectors, government, sport, universities, so many different ones. So it was a wonderful barometer, and people did not want to be on our laggards list, I recall.
Indeed.
We also published the WOB Traffic Light Index, possibly our most famous publication, a review of gender balance reporting and performance in the ASX 200, and designed to see how many companies were following the WGEA guidelines at the time. You compiled the report, and we launched at the AICD in September 2013 with John Atkin, then director at Horizon Holdings, or formerly QR National, and Arlene Tansey, a director of Adelaide Brighton Pacific Brands and Primary Healthcare. We received more than 750 media mentions and were on the range of a cover of a range of newspapers. Not our first rodeo in that instance. So can you tell me what inspired you to spend your summer holidays reading the annual reports of the ASX 200? And what do you think that the impact of this and our many other projects has been over the years?
Initially, I thought it was a good idea. I don't know why I thought that, but it seemed like, how can I spend my holidays? But actually, it's a bit more serious than that. Without quality data, as people who run companies know, you've got no capacity to improve or decide what you're going to do next, etc., etc. And the downside of not having quality data is you've got, what I'd call pompous assertions by supposedly well-informed but ignorant people. And without quality data, society will descend into a cesspool of prejudice as a general sort of comment. So data is really, really important. But once again, with data, you've got to be careful as to who's compiled it and what their prejudice, etc. are. But nevertheless, it's a good starting point. But really, it did occur to me that if we could provide some decent data and people could compare themselves, they could improve their management performance if, in fact, they thought diversity, etc., in their organisation was a good idea. And I think it sort of worked out that way.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. As I said, I recall because we gave people green, amber and red lights. And if you want to get published, get an index that gives people a really simple guide. Because I think we had about 16 companies on the green. And I remember being a early tweet from the then Telstra chair. Telstra makes the women on boards traffic light index in the green rating. I'm not even entirely sure they knew what it was, but it looked good because it was green and it wasn't red. So
yeah, it's actually interesting that people in the green category, a large number of them were former government business enterprises, including Telstra. Now, a majority of them have been very successful.
A number of the top performing companies, of course, had that background, which came out of government. So we travelled Australia together, many planes, creating and presenting workshops and seminars that were full of practical tips, actionable advice, and the stuff that no one ever told women on their journey to the boardroom. We had some great times. We shared a lot of laughs. We met some extraordinary women. What do you believe have been some of the great WOB successes and some when it comes to new ideas, innovations and the programs that we've done?
Okay, now you can get a long list, but I had to think about this and I thought about the Boardroom Diversity Index. I think that's a very, very useful tool. And hopefully for the 20th anniversary, you're publishing a compendium of some sort.
We are publishing it again. We're doing an update.
Oh, excellent, which will show the life and times and how things have changed, which will be absolutely fascinating. Obviously, the Jobs Board is a big achievement. And also the thing about the Jobs Board, it moved from the majority of the roles offered were not for profit or poorly paid, up to the point where, more than 60% of the roles were paid. And that met, I think, our remit to find people paid roles. Some people do want unpaid roles, and of course, it's incumbent upon serious directors, always do, an unpaid role, because that's your give back sort of thing. So that's the sort of structural stuff. And then the other thing, of course, is the individuals themselves who made successful board careers. Some of them who said, well, without a nudge from WOB, they would have still been doing who knows what sort of thing. And that's very satisfying, that you've made a difference to people's lives and they've achieved something that they thought perhaps was not in their remit for before us.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely, Ruth. I think so many people say that to me. People still ring me up and call me Ruth, so they're still confused.
How could that be?
I can't imagine. So, yeah, I think we have changed people's lives and people have told me that. And, it's really been quite extraordinary. And then they, in turn, have given back enormously to WOB as well through some of our major programs like, WOBSX, the next generation of female leaders, some really, really good ones there. You and I were known for being slightly eccentric, you more than me, I'm sure. And we initiated and supported some somewhat odd things over the years. So can you tell us a bit about the WOB Art Prize and why support for women-only recognised prizes, female-led startups and other endeavours still matters?
Yeah, okay. Well, you mentioned the WOB Art Prize, and the thing that flashed into my mind was this Dachshund dog attending the launch of one of the WOB Art Prizes. But no, one day, for some reason that I now can't remember, I bumped into Leslie Dimmock, who ran the TAP Art Gallery in Darlinghurst. Darlinghurst is still a fairly eccentric / seedy neck of the woods, in my view, in Sydney, just up the street from me, of course. And it was clear to me that she, in fact, did run a Women's Art Prize annually. And I thought, perhaps WOB can participate by giving them some money or catering or whatever. So that was where it came from, really, on the premise that organisations clearly need to support the community of some sort in which they operate, live, or whatever. So it seemed a pretty good fit. And it doesn't cost a fortune to sponsor things necessarily, so everybody should do it. That's my tip for the day.
Yeah, and you used to invest in female-led startups too.
I did. I also took the view. I am actually quite a modestly long-term investor, which means if you invest for long enough, you eventually make a few dollars. If you sit there and do nothing, it's a great strategy.
Not the toenails, though.
No, I've always taken the view that not only should you invest in things that are going to that are very, very well established, the top 20 companies and stuff like that, but you should also invest in companies that need a bit of a helping hand from their shareholders. And then I came upon Scale Investors, which was an organisation that invested in early stage startups, which had female founders, and based in Melbourne. And Susan Oliver was the driving force behind that. She was also, or is, the driving force behind those people who stand outside railway stations and hand out the big issue.
Yeah.
She's very, very talented. Sort of thing. So I thought, well, I can put a few dollars into Scale Investments. I should warn everybody that investing in startups, if you invest in 10, one might produce something. So you have to expect that some of them will go belly up, and I've got quite a few of those, needless to say. But yeah, I mean, you can't just invest in things that supposedly sure things. And it supports Australian innovation and all that sort of stuff, which in fact leads me to my latest investment, I suppose, which is dear old Charlie's Chocolate.
Charlie's Chocolates, I was going to
ask you. Which, if you want me to talk about that a little bit, I will. But
I do.
Well, Charlie's Chocolates makes craft chocolate that sells for about $12 to $14 a bar. So you can switch off if you haven't got any money. It's high-end stuff, high quality, magnificent packaging from an artist, believe it or not, in far north Queensland that I commissioned to do some paintings for us. And I should say I also support the local art show at Mission Beach.
No, it's moved.
Centre. And they're a pretty interesting bunch. There's about 4 women and 2 men are in the group that paint pictures and have an exhibition every 2 years. I think I did a blog on it. It is on the WOB website somewhere. Once again, I've invested in something that, hopefully will be a bit successful, Charlie's Chocolates. It started off as an idea of 2 people, like these things do. Let's grow cocoa in far north Queensland. That seems like a good idea. And that was quite some time ago. We've now got 150 shareholders or so. We're yet to make a profit. I should give you the financial warning here. But there are great prospects. And the vision for that is not dissimilar to WOB in a funny sort of way, is to establish, in this case, a cocoa industry in far north Queensland, rather than WOB, which is a entity that establishes women onto boards as an accepted way of Australian society, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I think and of course, you've had so much fun over the years. How many trips to far north Queensland have you had as a result of this? And some of them would be tax deductible, I'm sure.
Oh, they're almost all tax deductible, rest assured. And I travel in style. I should say I caught the train from Cairns to Proserpine this last time, which was last month, which was a load of fun. I recommend train travel with Queensland Rail. So there we go, a plug for them.
Oh, good plug for Queensland Rail. Thank you. So boardrooms have changed a lot over the past 20 years since we started. I mean, I just look at the regulatory load that you carried in your former role with Australian Ethical, looking at the regulatory load that directors would be carrying now. Board services become more professional, more challenging. It's a lot more hours. The number of women on boards continues to grow across all sectors and has hit our milestone of 40% in nearly all areas except the ASX 300 plus, I point out. So as WOB enters its next decade, what do you see are the next frontiers for us to tackle?
Well, you've mentioned the ASX 300, which is actually really quite interesting. The ASX 300 is really the
beyond 300, I'm saying.
Beyond, yeah. Is the sort of family and friends. I mean, the way you start up companies in Australia is you find somebody, yourself, with an idea, you find some friends who might chip in a few dollars, and eventually you might end up as an ASX 300 plus company. And to do that, when you then look around for boards of directors, you inevitably look to family, friends, associates, colleagues. And so really, it's back to that issue of walking up and down Martin Place and getting to know people. So tackling who are those people that potentially have got board gigs on offer. And so it might be that you run a ASX 300 plus event with all these obscure people who've never heard of WOB or don't know anything about anything other than their colleagues, as some form of focus going forward. I mean, if that in fact is the outcome of the data, that's the lagging area, that would seem to be something that's sort of a bit interesting. My other favourite topic is getting younger people involved on boards, and what can you do to encourage them? Generally, they're not that interested. So I think there's a bit of work to be done there. Sort of thing. All these WOB members have got daughters, I suspect. Lots of them have. So maybe that's an avenue. And then as a general comment, what great good thought can we have that will get people's interest? And I don't know what it is, but there's bound to be one somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's some great points, Ruth. I really love that idea and the involving young people. Well, you and I have always sought to create transparent, open access, and young people have been welcome to join WOB forever. You don't have to have credentials to join WOB. You just have to have aspirations and interest.
Yeah, that's right.
So finally, 3 words, you're a pithy woman, that would use to sum up the WOB journey over the past 20 years?
Now, you will be not surprised to know I had to think of these over my coffee at the local coffee shop this morning, and I came up with fun, achievement, and satisfaction.
And I endorse all of those. Ruth Medd, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you indeed for the privilege.